She walked into a billionaire's penthouse, wearing a hotel cleaner's uniform. He thought she was a gift, something arranged for his pleasure. What he didn't know? She was a nursing student, covering her aunt's shift for one night. And that one misunderstanding, it shattered her dignity and changed both of their lives forever. The rain came down in heavy sheets over Boston that night, slicking the streets with a glossy sheen that reflected the hazy glow of old gas lamps in Beacon Hill. Inside a cramped third-floor apartment above a laundromat, Clara Jennings sat cross-legged, on a creaky twin mattress surrounded by highlighters, flashcards, and the gentle hum of exhaustion. The NCLEX, her final nursing licensure exam, was just days away. This wasn't just any test. Passing it would mark the end of a 6-year odyssey through night school, part-time jobs, and enough coffee to keep a small cafe afloat. And yet tonight her focus was slipping. Her phone buzzed once, then again. She glanced at the screen. Aunt, Miriam. The name alone made her sit up straighter. Clara, came the voice, breathless and trembling on the other end. I hurt myself. My knee. It gave out again. Clara dropped her pen. Where are you? What happened? I was cleaning the upper lounge and twisted it wrong. I managed to get home, but I can't walk, sweetheart. I can't do my shift tonight. And you know what they'll do if I don't show? Her voice cracked. Clara felt her stomach knot. Her aunt worked as a cleaner at the Langley, one of Boston's oldest and most prestigious 5-star hotels, known for hosting everyone from visiting royals to celebrities escaping the spotlight. It paid just enough to cover their rent and groceries. But Miriam was still on probation after recovering from a long illness. Another missed shift could mean termination. Can you? Miriam hesitated. Could you go for me? Just this once? It's the executive level, the 17th floor, VIP suites. You know how I keep it all written in that notebook on the fridge. You've helped me memorize the order before. Clara looked around the room. Her review materials were spread out like a battleground. She closed her eyes. It was one night, one shift, one favor. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. You will? Miriam's voice was soaked in relief. Oh, baby, thank you. Thank you. The uniforms hanging in the hall closet, the ID badges in the pocket. Use the staff entrance on Arlington Street. Clara nodded, though her aunt couldn't see her. Ice that knee. I'll handle everything. After the call, Clara stood in front of the hallway mirror, the overhead bulb flickering weakly above her. The uniform hung loose on her frame, slightly too big. The hotel logo was faded on the collar, and the staff ID read, M.L. Jennings, Housekeeping. She tied her hair into a low bun, as Aunt Miriam always did, and looked at herself. She didn't see a future nurse. She didn't see someone who graduated with honors. She saw a hotel cleaner, about to walk into a world that had never once welcomed her. She left the apartment carrying an umbrella missing 3 spokes and caught the Trasha 43 bus downtown, dodging puddles with every step. The Langley loomed in the distance like something out of an old Gatsby novel, columns, golden lamps, ivy-wrapped walls, and yet all Clara could focus on was how her sneakers squeaked against the tile as she walked to the back entrance. ID? The supervisor barked. A tired man with ink-stained fingers and an unlit cigarette behind his ear barely looked up from his clipboard. Clara swiped the card. The green light blinked. You're late, he muttered. You're covering the 17th. Tonight. Presidential suite and 2 VIP doubles. Full reset. No shortcuts. He shoved a cart toward her, stacked with fresh linens, sprays, a vacuum, and crisp miniature soaps. Clara pushed the heavy cart toward the employee elevator. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed the button. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and she began her ascent into a life so far removed from her own it might as well have been fantasy. The 17th floor was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Thick Persian rugs muffled her footsteps. The walls weren't just wallpapered. They were paneled with what looked like polished cherrywood. Artwork hung in golden frames under soft museum lighting. There were no buzzing overhead fluorescents here, only crystal sconces. Clara paused, took a breath, then looked down at her aunt's notes. Room 1712 and 1714 were first, both unoccupied, both straightforward. Clara moved like a shadow, her hands following the steps she'd memorized over years of listening to Miriam vent about messy VIPs and neurotic standards. Sanitize, straighten, fold edges, align toiletries. She worked quietly, methodically. Every time she passed a mirrored surface, she caught glimpses of herself and felt like an intruder. It wasn't until she was finishing up the second suite that the walkie-talkie on her card crackled to life. Emergency request. Penthouse suite. Just vacated. Guest left early. Needs full clean ASAP. Anyone on 17 available? Clara's thumb hovered over the talk button. I can take it, she said before she realized it. Copy that. Room 1700. Use service door and be fast. Next arrival is pending. Her heart pounded. The penthouse. She'd heard Miriam talk about it. A 2-level palace on the top corner of the hotel with panoramic views of the Boston skyline, a soaking tub the size of a pool, and a fireplace carved from imported stone. The kind of place Clara couldn't even afford to dream about, and now she'd be cleaning it. The door opened with a gentle click and Clara pushed the cart inside. For a long moment, she just stood there. The room stretched endlessly, a spiral. Staircase in one corner, glass walls revealing a thunderstorm brewing above the Charles River. There were velvet drapes, plush cream sofas, and a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a ballroom. Even the silence sounded expensive. She got to work, one task at a time. Remake the bed with triple-folded corners. Sanitize the bathroom. Gold fixtures, rain shower head, Egyptian cotton towels. Wipe the bar area, align the wine glasses with the etched logo facing forward. Even the books on the shelves were leather-bound first editions. She was kneeling near the hearth, wiping smudges from the marble, when the door clicked again behind her. She didn't turn immediately. Probably someone from staff. But then came a voice. Deep, amused, slightly worn. Didn't expect company tonight. Clara froze. Slowly she turned. The man in the doorway was tall, dressed in tailored slacks and an open white shirt, the cuffs rolled up casually. Salt and pepper in his dark hair. He looked like he'd just stepped off a Forbes cover. Julian Roth. The name hit her before she could process the moment. She'd seen his face in newspapers and on investment podcasts. The billionaire angel investor from New York. He owned part of the Langley. His eyes scanned her slowly, then settled on the ID. And something in his expression shifted. Ah, he said, a slow smile spreading. So they've gone for the quiet type this time. Clara's mouth parted, confused. Excuse me? He stepped further into the room, setting his phone on a side table. I told the concierge I didn't want distractions, but I see they've decided otherwise. You can relax. I don't need the full routine. Her heart thudded. I'm not, she began, but her voice caught. No need to be shy. They always act like this. It's part of the appeal, I suppose. Sweet, innocent. You wear it well. Her hands were shaking. I'm just here to clean, she whispered. But Julian wasn't listening. He poured himself a drink and took a seat by the window, watching the rain. It was clear he'd already made his mind up. Clara stood. Her ID badge, now trembling against her chest, slipped from her jacket and hit the floor with a soft clink. She grabbed her cloth and the edge of her dignity and fled the room without another word. The elevator doors closed behind her with a metallic hiss, but Clara could still feel the weight of his words pressing against her chest like a hand she hadn't asked for. She didn't even stop to retrieve the ID badge. It lay there on the plush carpet of the penthouse suite, M.L. Jennings, abandoned like the truth she couldn't get him to see. By the time she reached the staff lounge, her face was soaked, not from the misty drizzle outside, but from the hot tears she could no longer hold back. She changed out of the oversized uniform with trembling fingers, her mind reeling from what had just happened. What hurt more than the humiliation was the assumption, the casual ease with which he'd decided what kind of woman she was, because of where she stood, because of what she wore, because people like her didn't belong in places like that, not unless they were part of the furniture or part of a fantasy. She wasn't human to him. She was a service. Meanwhile, back in the penthouse, Julian Roth finished his drink with a satisfied sigh. It had been a long week of international meetings, board disputes, and the cold politeness of European investors in Swiss conference rooms. He glanced toward the marble hearth and the cleaning supplies that had been hastily abandoned. Odd. Normally, the girls left with a wink or at least a final nod. This one had just run. He walked over, noticing the cloth still on the ledge. And then something else. An old scuffed digital recorder, the kind journalists or students used, had slid out from under a towel stack. Curious, Julian picked it up. It was still on. He pressed play. A female voice, soft but firm, filled the suite. Okay, Clara, breathe. You've done harder things than this. It's just one night. You're doing this for Aunt Miriam. Get through this, and you're back to flashcards in the morning. One step at a time. Julian froze. He played it again and again. This wasn't some performance. This wasn't a seduction. This wasn't anything like what he had assumed. This was a woman, rehearsing courage. He sank into the armchair, guilt like a sudden flood rising in his chest. It was 2 a.m. when he called down to security. "Pull the hallway footage from the last 3 hours," he said. "Penthouse level. I want to see who came in and out of this room." The guard, startled by the direct request from the hotel's partial owner, complied without delay. 10 minutes later, Julian sat in the private surveillance office, eyes locked on the monitor. There she was, Clara Jennings, pushing the cart awkwardly, struggling to maneuver around the corners. She paused in front of the suite, clearly nervous, then keyed in without hesitation. No exchange, no handler, no suggestive behavior. She was just working. His jaw tightened. When the footage ended, he leaned back and sighed. "Do we know her name?" he asked. The head of security flipped through a log. "The badge says M.L. Jennings. That would be Miriam Jennings, longtime cleaning staff. But that wasn't Miriam." Julian rubbed his forehead. Then who was she? Could run her through facial recognition in the employee database? No. Julian stood. "Just give me everything you have on Miriam Jennings. Address, schedule, emergency contact." He didn't know what he was hoping to find. All he knew was that he had misjudged someone badly, and that someone had looked at him like he'd shattered something inside her she didn't even know was fragile until that moment. He needed to make it right. The next afternoon, Clara stood at the sink in the community clinic in Roxbury, helping restock hygiene kits for a weekend outreach program. It was volunteer work. Something she had fit into her already cramped life because she remembered what it was like to go without. She still hadn't told Aunt Miriam what had happened. Just said the shift went fine, that she was tired, that she needed to focus. But even as she organized soap bars and travel-sized toothpaste, her mind kept replaying his face, his voice, the way he had smirked when he said, "You wear it well." It made her skin crawl. So when the clinic door swung open and Julian Roth stepped inside, Clara didn't even move at first. She thought it was a hallucination. But no, there he was, wearing jeans and a charcoal peacoat, holding something in his hand, her digital recorder. Her breath caught. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know," he replied gently. Clara looked around. The clinic was quiet. Most staff had left for the day. She turned back to him, arms folded across her chest. "You came to report me. You want to get my aunt fired now?" He blinked, taken aback. "No. God, no. I'd never do that. I'm here to apologize." The word hung in the air like something too heavy for the room. "I reviewed the security footage," he said. "I listened to the recorder you left behind, and I realized," he paused, "I was wrong. About you. About everything." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Do you think that changes anything?" "No," he admitted, "but it's a start." She stared at him for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low. "You looked at me like I was disposable, like my presence meant something sleazy. And I couldn't stop thinking, is that all people ever see when I step into the wrong room? Someone poor? Someone easy to dismiss?" Julian swallowed hard. "You didn't deserve that. You were trying to help someone you love. And I made it about me." Silence again. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. "But I wanted you to know that you've stayed on my mind, not because of the mistake, but because of the dignity you showed, even when I gave you no reason to." Clara exhaled slowly. There it was again. The weight, but this time, not entirely unwelcome. Later that evening, Clara sat on the front steps of her apartment building, the sky turning dusky violet over the skyline. She held the recorder in her hand. She had replayed the moment in the suite over and over again, trying to erase the sting. But somehow, what Julian said today had shifted something, not erased the pain, but acknowledged it, and maybe that was more than most people would do. Inside, Aunt Miriam was asleep, her leg elevated, the scent of menthol balm wafting from the bedroom. Clara whispered to the recorder before switching it off for the night. Today was strange, but maybe not all strange things are bad. Maybe some of them are the beginning of something else. Something. I don't even know the word yet. 3 days had passed since Julian Roth had stood inside that quiet clinic and apologized. 3 days and he was still thinking about her. That in itself wasn't so surprising. Julian was a man trained to fixate, on numbers, on markets, on strategy. But this wasn't that kind of fixation. This wasn't about fixing something for profit or control. This was about regret, about awakening, and about a girl whose eyes, wet with betrayal, had made the room feel colder than any boardroom he'd ever sat in. He sat in his office that morning, the skyline of Manhattan stretching outside the floor to ceiling, windows, but the view didn't anchor him like it used to. Normally, he would have already sent 20 emails, signed off on 2 new ventures, and dictated notes to his assistant. But today, he kept finding himself opening her voice recording again. Get through this, and you're back to flashcards in the morning. She hadn't even gone in expecting recognition. She wasn't asking for favors. She wasn't playing a role. She had just wanted to help her aunt, and he had treated her like a purchase. Julian clicked out of the recording and called for his assistant. Julia, he said, cancel my lunch and get me everything the foundation has on our community. Clinic partners in Boston, especially the one in Roxbury. Julia paused. The one Clara Jennings volunteers at? He looked up, surprised. You remember her name? Julia smiled faintly. I'm a woman. We tend to remember the people who break through a billionaire's usual apathy. That afternoon, Julian appeared at the Heart and Hands Community Center, unannounced. This time, he didn't go to see Clara. Not directly. Instead, he walked through the hallways, talking to nurses, the clinic director, and a few of the volunteers. He asked about supplies, asked what they needed, what they were lacking. When the director pulled out a tattered folder of outdated grant applications, Julian made a note. Later, he sat in the break room beside an elderly volunteer named Marcia, who offered him a cup of instant coffee in a chipped mug that read, "Kindness is contagious." You the donor type? She asked, studying him. Sometimes, he said, but I'm trying to be the listener type today. Marcia chuckled. Then you're already better than half the people who come here with a checkbook and an ego. That night, Julian walked back to his brownstone in the West Village with more clarity than he'd felt in weeks. He knew what he had to do, but not for appearances or penance. He needed to do it because it mattered. Back in Boston, Clara's week had blurred into motion. Clinic shifts, final review classes, her aunt's physical therapy appointments. She barely had time to process anything anymore. But late at night, when the city quieted down, she would sit with her notebook and glance at the recorder now perched on her windowsill. It had become a symbol of something more than a mistake. It reminded her of how fragile dignity could be and how quickly it could be dismissed by someone with power. And yet, she found herself replaying Julian's visit. Not the sweet, not the sting, but the clinic. His words. You didn't deserve that. He had looked different that day, not polished or smug, just real, like someone trying to carry something he couldn't name. Still, she didn't know if she trusted him. Not entirely. People like Julian Roth didn't change. Did they? 2 weeks later, the Heart and Hands director called Clara into her office. There's been a change in our funding, she said, smiling like she was holding back excitement. We received an anonymous donation, enough to fund 3 full-time nurses, upgrade the pharmacy tech, and install 2 new exam rooms. Clara blinked. Wait, anonymous? The director nodded. No strings attached, just a note. She handed Clara the envelope. There was no letter inside. Just a copy of her voice recording transcript. Typed and centered. 1 line highlighted in yellow. 1 step at a time. Clara's throat tightened. She closed the envelope, her fingers lingering on the edge. A few days later, they crossed paths. Again. It wasn't planned. She was at a local public health panel, invited last minute to speak about the clinic's resource shortages. Julian had been asked to sit on the same panel due to his foundation's recent investments in medical equity programs. Clara almost turned and walked out when she saw his name on the placard. But then she remembered what she had told herself. Every day, she wouldn't run. Not from exams, not from bills, not from him. So she stayed, and when she spoke, her voice steady, her hands only slightly trembling, Julian didn't interrupt. He didn't posture or pivot. He just listened. She talked about invisible labor, about students who chose between textbooks and dinner, about her aunt, about how one assumption could undo someone's entire sense of worth. The audience clapped when she finished. Julian was the first to stand. After the event, she found him waiting outside by the parking lot, leaning against a lamppost like a man with too much to say and no idea where to start. I meant to leave after the panel, he said. But you didn't, she replied. He nodded. Because I wanted to tell you that what you said in there, it was powerful. And you made me realize something. She raised an eyebrow. I've spent most of my life being calculated, he admitted. Strategic. I assumed I was protecting myself, but I was actually just avoiding responsibility, avoiding people. You challenged that without even trying. She let the silence stretch between them for a moment. Then softly, so what do you want, Julian? He looked up surprised. I want to help, he said. Not with grand gestures, just in the way I should have the first night. Quietly, respectfully, and I want to learn. About your world, if you'll let me. Clara studied him. There was no flirtation, no arrogance, just sincerity, and a man who looked like he was finally standing still long enough to feel his own heart. They didn't exchange numbers that night. Clara didn't invite him to coffee or offer him forgiveness, but something shifted. Later, back home, she told Aunt Miriam everything about the suite, about Julian's assumption, and about what had happened since. Her aunt listened with wide eyes, then leaned back on the couch with a tired sigh. Well, Miriam said, I'd say he's either got a lot of guilt or a heart that's finally waking up. Clara smiled. Maybe both. Clara wasn't used to people sticking around in her world. People often left, sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 17. Friends had come and gone over the years, most drifting away when the reality of her schedule, her jobs, her studies, her responsibilities made brunches and birthdays feel like distant luxuries. So when Julian Roth didn't vanish after the panel, when he continued to show up in small, thoughtful ways, it caught her off guard. Not romantically, not dramatically, just consistently. It started with a message delivered through the clinic director. A note thanking her for her speech, paired with a stack of brand new stethoscopes and thermometers donated in memory of overlooked voices. No name attached, but she knew. Then came a short, sincere email forwarded from his assistant. Would you be open to coffee sometime? Strictly educational. I want to understand the world beyond boardrooms. She stared at the message for hours before replying. Only if you let me pick the place. They met the following Saturday at a tiny cafe nestled in the South End. It wasn't Instagrammable. It didn't have oat milk, but the coffee was strong and the sunlight hit the chipped windows in just the right way to make it feel like home. Julian was already there when Clara walked in, sitting at a wobbly corner table with 2 mugs, 1 black coffee, 1 chai latte. You remembered? She said, blinking in surprise. He smiled. I don't forget important things. For the next hour they talked, not about what had happened, not about apologies, but about everything in between. He asked her what it felt like to grow up working 2 jobs before turning 20. She asked him what loneliness looked like when you lived in penthouses and private jets. He admitted he once went an entire week without speaking to anyone who wasn't paid to be around him. She told him about falling asleep in library corners between shifts, about how grief had made her angry, focused, disciplined. They didn't flirt. They didn't pretend. They just saw each other. Over the next few weeks, their conversations continued, sometimes through short email exchanges, sometimes over coffee, sometimes just walking through Boston's public garden as spring began to warm the air. Clara learned that Julian was far from the media's image of him. He wasn't cruel, just careful, wary. He had grown up in a world of control and expectations. Trust to him had always been transactional, until her. Julian in turn learned that Clara wasn't fragile. She was steel wrapped in quiet. Her calm wasn't passivity. It was earned, disciplined, necessary. She didn't ask for help easily, didn't crave praise, and never tried to impress. One afternoon, after visiting the clinic together, they sat in a quiet corner of the Boston Public Library. Julian pulled out a folder. This is for you, he said, pushing it toward her. Clara frowned. What is it? A scholarship, he said, through the Heart Foundation, for nursing students who've demonstrated resilience, service, and leadership. She opened the folder. Her name was printed on the front page in bold type. Clara's first instinct was to close it. I didn't earn this just because of what happened, she said. You can't buy back that night. I know, Julian replied softly, and I wouldn't try. He leaned forward, his voice steady. This isn't guilt. This is recognition. You didn't just clean a room that night, Clara. You walked into a place where no one saw you as fully human, and you stood your ground. You reminded me that dignity doesn't come with a dollar sign. You are the kind of person who deserves this, and 1,000 things more. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything. Their connection deepened, not through spectacle, but through small things. Clara left sticky notes of encouragement on his inbox when she learned he had a tough foundation pitch. Julian showed up to one of her free clinic classes with a stack of donated anatomy flashcards, handwritten with mnemonics she'd mentioned once in passing. He started asking more questions, then giving answers. She started leaning in just a little more when he spoke. They weren't a couple. Not yet. There were no late-night declarations, no paparazzi moments. But there was presence. And presence, Clara learned, could feel a lot like love. Then came the day they visited a new site together, a burned-out school building in Dorchester, slated to become the next free health and resource hub under Julian's foundation. As they walked the dusty halls, Clara pointed out where the pediatric center could go. Julian listened, nodding, following her hand as if it held blueprints he didn't yet understand. At one point, she stopped in the old library, now filled with rubble and sunlight. She ran her hand across a cracked desk. "This is where things change," she said quietly. Julian looked at her. "For the clinic?" She turned to face him, her voice steady. "No, for me. This is the first time I'm building something with someone who doesn't want to rescue me or control me. You're just walking beside me." He didn't speak for a moment. Then slowly he said, "You've changed me, Clara, not because you tried to, but because you refused to be anyone but yourself." That evening, back in her apartment, Clara sat with Aunt Miriam, the windows open to the spring breeze. "He's not who I thought he was," she said. Her aunt smiled without looking up from her sewing. "Neither are you, baby. That night didn't break you. It woke you up. And sometimes, the people we least expect walk into our lives just to hold up a mirror." The ballroom shimmered like something out of a dream. Golden light cascaded from our chandeliers, illuminating crisp black tuxedos, sequined gowns, and elegant updos. The Langley Hotel, that monument of polished grandeur, was hosting the Heart Foundation's annual gala, its most prestigious night of the year. And for the first time, Clara Jennings stood in its halls not as a cleaner or a mistake, but as a guest of honor. Her dress was navy satin, simple and timeless. Her hair swept into a soft bun. Around her neck, a single silver pendant, a quiet reminder of her mother. Across the room, Julian stood on stage, wearing a tailored grey suit. But gone was the cold edge of power and control. Tonight, when he stepped up to the microphone, his voice was steady, but softer, stripped of performance. For years, he began scanning the crowd. "I measured value by numbers, by contracts, by clean spreadsheets and billion-dollar figures." A polite ripple of laughter moved through the audience. But this year, I was reminded that real value, human value, comes in moments that don't make headlines. I want to tell you about someone who changed my life, not with ambition or strategy, but with quiet courage. Clara's breath caught. All eyes turned, but Julian's gaze was fixed only on her. She walked into a room she didn't belong in, just trying to help someone she loved. I misjudged her. I disrespected her. But what she taught me that night, and in every moment since, unraveled everything I thought I knew about dignity. The room was silent. Because of her, this foundation is expanding. Because of her, I've stopped chasing more and started investing in what actually matters. She reminded me, kindness is power, empathy is currency, and sometimes the greatest stories begin in the most unexpected places. The applause was thunderous, but Clara couldn't hear it over the pounding of her heart. Julian stepped down from the stage, but he didn't return to the VIP table. Instead, he slipped quietly through the crowd and made his way to the balcony, where Clara already stood, catching her breath beneath the stars. The city below glimmered like it had a heartbeat. He approached carefully. "You look," Clara smiled gently. "Like I belong?" He laughed under his breath. "More than anyone in there." A pause stretched between them, thick with memory. "I meant every word," Julian said. "And I know this night doesn't erase the first one. But I hope it reminds you how far we've come since then." Clara looked at him. Truly looked. Gone was the man who mistook her for a service. Standing in front of her was the man who now spent his weekends at the community clinic, learning how to administer vaccines. who personally called donors to fund mentorship programs for low-income students, who stopped seeing people as assets and started feeling. You changed too, she whispered. And not for me. For yourself. He nodded, swallowing. Because of you. The air was cool. Clara stepped forward slowly, searching his face. I used to think people like us couldn't belong in each other's worlds, she said. But maybe the world we build together doesn't have to follow the same rules. Julian's voice dropped. I've built companies, satellites, entire networks. But nothing has ever scared me more than how much I feel when I look at you. She laughed, gently, openly, for the first time in a long while. I used to think love had to be loud, she said. But now I know it can also be quiet, earned, patient, like the way you show up, without needing to be seen. They stood, in silence, hearts open beneath the Boston sky. Then, with no grandeur, no fireworks, Clara reached out and took his hand, and that was enough. A year later, Clara walked the halls of Boston General, her white coat fluttering slightly as she moved from patient room to patient room. She was a full-time nurse now, respected, competent, steady. But she never let the title define her. She still stopped to chat with cafeteria workers, still brought tea to the elderly woman who never got visitors, still left sticky notes of encouragement in break rooms. Julian, meanwhile, had restructured his empire. Not dissolved it, he was still a titan in many ways, but he shifted its heartbeat. The Heart Foundation now funded over 20 health clinics across underserved US cities, offered housing stipends to students in healthcare, and provided free mental health counseling to low-income workers in the hospitality industry. He still wore suits, still made billion-dollar decisions. But now he also showed up for kindergarten ribbon cuttings, led grant review meetings, and read medical journals. Not to invest, but to understand. They didn't live in a penthouse or a brownstone. They rented a brown loft just outside of Cambridge, with squeaky floors, a piano by the window, and a tiny kitchen where they danced barefoot to Nina Simone on Sundays, and no one needed to know how it all started. It wasn't about headlines, or scandals, or fairy tales. It was about grace. 2 years later, Clara stood in room 1700, the Langley's penthouse suite. This time she wore a tailored navy blazer with a small gold pin bearing the Heart Foundation's logo. The room had been redecorated, but the bones were still the same. The view still stretched out over the Charles. The marble fireplace still gleamed. She was there to speak to a group of new hospitality staff about dignity in service work. How cleaners and cooks and attendants weren't background extras, but the backbone of luxury itself. At the end of her talk, a young woman raised her hand. "Miss Jennings," she asked, "is it true you used to be a cleaner here?" Clara smiled. "Yes," she said, "for one night. And it changed everything." As she left the suite, Julian waited for her in the hallway, leaning casually against the same elevator where she once clutched a cart in fear. He offered his hand. She took it, and together they walked away. Not into a fairy tale, but into something better. A life they built, side by side.